All right, we've experienced our first college closure of the semester. Congratulations! As mentioned on the first day, anytime the college is closed, we will continue our class as outlined in the schedule of instruction. The way these recordings work is this. Be sure you have something to write with and on, including your Jeopardy list, as these are your class notes for the concepts. And it's also a good idea to have your textbook handy since I will refer to it during the lesson. We will not review the recorded lesson in class, nor will I reteach the concepts. It is your responsibility to listen to this lesson prior to our next class meeting. Be sure to jot down any questions you have, as I am happy to answer questions regarding clarification on a concept. Okay, so we learned last week that psychology is a science for good reason, to move away from opinion toward empirical data that is based on factual evidence. By using the scientific method, we also avoid bias and error. We know that. This semester, we'll be talking about human development within the context of three domains: biosocial, physical, bodily growth; cognitive, how we process and use information; and psychosocial, emotions, social skills, and relationships. Learning about human growth helps everyone respond to all of life's complexities with wise reactions. It helps us develop with more joy and fulfillment and less harm and despair. Additionally, if we understand development, we can help ourselves and others fulfill their potential. So notice the characteristics of growth over the lifespan, page 4. These characteristics are explained in greater detail over pages 7 through 22, with the definition of the lifespan perspective on page 7. Let's take a look at table 1.3 on page 21. Does growth occur in a linear, perfectly straight fashion? No. And if you look at figure 1.3, page 8, you see that. If we were to study any human trait, we should see that some traits appear and disappear with increases, decreases, and zigzags. We've been talking about Jessica Cox and what she teaches us about human development. It's easy to hold the belief that your culture is the best or that you are the best when compared to others. But it's important not to reduce respect and appreciation for others. Look back to that definition of the science of human development. We want to study all kinds of people from all walks of life. So we must avoid the difference equals deficit error. This is one reason we need the scientific method in psychology, to produce empirical data for accurate assessments, to avoid making this mistake. Because Jessica deviates from what we call the norm, air quotes, this does not make her inferior, nor should her differences be viewed as problems. Plasticity helps to explain Jessica's fantastic abilities. Turn to page 20. If we think back to figure 1.3, we know patterns of growth are not linear. Plasticity refers to two aspects of development. Number one, our traits can be molded, yet we, number two, maintain a certain durability of identity. Change is possible. Let's talk about Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems approach, one of the theories you can use for your paper. This is a Jeopardy list item. There is a visual representation of this theory, similar to that in your textbook under the Chapter 1 Study Tools list, Chapter 1 Study Tools heading in course content, and you can attach this to your Jeopardy list. How many of you agree that we are affected by our surroundings and the interactions we have with other people? That was Bronfenbrenner's belief. There are three nested levels that surround you as the individual, and you are affected by each one. The microsystem. This is your immediate surroundings, like your family, your classroom, your neighborhood, wherever you are at the moment. Your exosystem. These are the external networks and local institutions like community and church, just a step outside the microsystem. The macrosystem. This is your larger social setting, and it includes culture, social conditions, etc. We also have the Chronos system. This places emphasis on the importance of historical time or the passage of time. Now, because there's a dynamic interaction among all the systems, Bronfenbrenner included a fifth system, mesosystem, interactions among the systems. That's what these green arrows are. Let's go over an example of this together once we reconvene in class. For now, let's move on to talk about how we put the scientific method into practice in the field of human development. There are hundreds of ways to design a study and analyze its results, but there are three basic research designs that we can rely on. Before we even get started, make yourself a note that the experiment is the only design that will allow you to establish a cause and effect relationship. We'll start with observation. Observation studies involve unobtrusively watching and recording behavior. How many of you love sitting at the mall or wherever people watching? Though through naturalistic observation, we simply watch people's behavior unfold in a natural setting. There's no interference. It's like people watching. If we use scientific observation, we could invite people to a lab setting to observe them, which would obviously change the person's behavior. This is called the observer effect, when people change their behavior or act differently because they know they are being watched. Another limitation of observation is that it does not tell us why people do what they do. It does not give us the cause of a behavior. Experiments are designed in a manner to allow us to determine a cause and effect relationship. Remember that this is the only research method that determines cause and effect. There are several components of an experiment. You must gather a representative sample of participants and randomly divide them into at least two groups. The participants in the experimental group have something done to them. They receive the independent variable. The folks in the control group receive no special treatment. They don't receive the independent variable. So in talking about these variables, the independent variable is whatever it is that the experimenter is manipulating. So it is the variable that I intentionally manipulate as the researcher. On the other hand, the dependent variable is the outcome, what we measure that may change depending on the independent variable. So an experiment will compare the experimental group to the control group. Does that independent variable result in a different outcome for the two groups? When differences between the experimental and control groups are greater than chance, then we say they are considered to be significant. We can also easily review an example of this in class if you ask me. Let's move on to a case study. A case study is an in-depth study of one person. The advantage is that you get a lot of rich detail about that person, but the disadvantage is that it does not generalize or translate to everyone else. In addition to observations and experiments and case studies, surveys are often used to collect data. We usually think of written questionnaires as surveys, and they are, but interviews are also a type of survey. While using a survey allows you to collect a large amount of data from a large group of people fairly quickly, respondents often don't tell the truth, and it's really difficult to write good questions that truly assess what you want to know. So 4 common ways of collecting research data in psychology are observations, experiments, surveys, and case studies. The study of human development, however, requires something more. We are interested in how people change or remain the same over time. There are 3 basic research designs that allow for this type of investigation. They are cross-sectional research, longitudinal research, and cross-sequential research. I do not have my textbook with me today, but in your book there is a visual example toward the end of the chapter outlining the time frame for conducting research. Find that visual diagram. It's much easier to understand that way. Cross-sectional research, what you're looking at on screen now, compares groups of people of different ages, but who are similar in other important ways. This is the quickest way to study changes over the lifespan. An example might be, a researcher is interested in finding out whether children's ability to use self-control when offered unhealthy food changes with age. So he asked parents of 3-year-olds, parents of 6-year-olds, and parents of 9-year-olds to bring their children to the lab. When there, they are allowed to eat as much candy, cookies, and cake as they want. The researcher then compares the amount of food eaten by children of the 3 different ages. The problem with this cross-sectional research is that differences may be due to differences in background instead of due to developmental differences. These are called cohort differences. A cohort is just a group of people who were born at about the same time and moved through life together, experiencing the same historical events and cultural shifts at about the same age. For example, if you were interested in how computer ability changes with age, and you used a cross-sectional study, you might examine the computer skills of 14-year-olds, 24-year-olds, 34-year-olds, and 44-year-olds. The difference may not have anything to do with development or ability, but may have more to do with exposure and background. Let's look at longitudinal. Longitudinal research, a researcher follows the same people for long periods of time. This helps us determine whether differences are due to age instead of cohort differences. Basically, you just keep collecting data on the same people as they grow up. For example, if you wanted to study the development of handwriting ability in children, you could measure the handwriting of a group of 2nd graders and continue taking handwriting samples from these same children each year until they're in the 6th grade. Obviously, this type of research can take a long time. So another method is cross-sequential research. Cross-sequential research is a sort of combination of longitudinal and cross-sectional. It is very time-consuming and very complex, but it probably gives the best information about development. As you see on screen, it's similar to doing longitudinal studies on 2 or more groups. Look at Table 1.7 on page 34. This is something that can help you when you're reading articles for your research paper. So here's a challenge question. What is the best method for collecting data? There is no best method. You'll see this on page 39. As which method you use is dependent upon your research question. Certain methods work best for certain hypotheses. Most importantly, as we conduct research in the field of human development, we must adhere to a strict code of ethics as outlined by the American Psychological Association, or the APA. First, just like the medical field, we can do no harm, regardless of whether the harm is physical or psychological. Using deception is okay as long as it incurs no harm and you let your participants know about the deception and why during a debriefing. All participants, including children, must give informed consent. Usually you develop a form that outlines the goals of the study and you let participants know about any involved risks. They decide whether or not they want to participate and usually give consent by way of signature. If a child cannot give consent, a parent can give consent. However, when a child is old enough and competent enough to understand what it means to give consent, you must have both the child and the parent's consent. Their participation in your study is completely voluntary. They can walk away at any time, even if your study is not complete. Any information they give you is confidential and should be secured properly. You cannot identify participants by name in your research report, nor share their information with anyone else. After your study is complete, you must conduct a debriefing. This is a meeting during which you explain your study, its goals, any rationale for using deception if you used it, and you answer participants' questions. Leave your participants feeling good they participated in your research. Listen to them and address any concerns they may have. No matter how your results turn out, never falsify the data or distort findings to make them look more important than they are. Even if the research study didn't turn out the way you wanted it to, we can still learn from that, and it's valuable. Falsifying and cooking data hurts the field of human development. It is unethical and it can cost you your job and even your licensure and credentials. That's all for this lesson, other than discussing the major developmental theories in class, along with an implied example of Bronfenbrenner. I want you to be prepared by listening to this before our next class and jot down any questions you may have. We will discuss theory and thus fill in your remaining Jeopardy concepts in class. If you find you need help with this chapter, check out the resources that will always be available to you. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I'm here for that reason, and I'm happy to assist you.